Amid the twinkling lights of Christmas Eve, in a small diner tucked away in rural Idaho, 24-year-old Grace Sullivan was working her part-time shift as a waitress. She lived with her mother in a modest apartment, still trying to heal from the sudden loss of her father earlier that year. That Christmas Eve, the diner was nearly empty. Most of the regulars had gone home to be with their families. Only a few lonely souls lingered, seeking warmth and quiet comfort in mugs of coffee and slices of holiday pie. Just before closing time, as the staff began wiping down tables and totaling receipts, the doorbell chimed. An elderly man stepped in from the snowy night. He wore a thin, tattered coat, worn-out shoes, and his long silver hair fell past his collar. No one really noticed him. The manager, without even glancing up, called out loudly, "We're closing in 15 minutes." His tone made it clear he didn't want to serve anyone else. Grace hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'll take care of him, Joe. It's Christmas Eve." The manager sighed, but gave a reluctant nod. Grace led the old man to a table near the window, where soft lights from the nearby storefronts glowed gently on the glass. "What can I get for you?" she asked, notebook in hand. "Just a little soup, if you have it," he rasped, his voice unused to conversation. "And maybe some water." Grace disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a steaming bowl of potato soup, larger than usual, and the last gingerbread cookie from the display, decorated with red and green icing. "I added the cookie," she said as she placed it beside the bowl. "No one should go without something sweet on Christmas Eve." The man's calloused hands wrapped around the warm bowl. "That's very kind of you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Grace smiled softly, her heart filling with joy at being able to do something special on this night. On Christmas Eve, the thought of someone going hungry just didn't feel right. The old man ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each spoonful as if it were a rare treat. His eyes were cloudy with age, yet still held a curious sharpness. Occasionally, he scanned the room, noticing little details others might miss. When Grace returned to clear his table, he looked up at her with an intensity that made her pause. "You know," he murmured, almost whispering, "you look exactly like the person who once saved my life." Grace blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry." The man leaned in slightly, and in a voice only she could hear, whispered 7 words. "You are your father's daughter in every way." A chill ran down Grace's spine. Her father had passed away just 10 months earlier, a humble man who rarely spoke of his time in the military. How could this stranger possibly know anything about him, or about her? Before she could speak, the old man stood, placed a neatly folded $5 bill on the table, far more than the meal cost, and nodded once in gratitude. "Merry Christmas, Grace Sullivan," he said, then turned and walked toward the door. "If you believe that good people deserve to be remembered, stay with us." Grace stood frozen, watching him vanish into the softly falling snow. How had he known her full name? She wasn't wearing a name tag that night, and she certainly hadn't introduced herself. She rushed to the door, flung it open, but he had disappeared into the night. Only footprints in the freshly fallen snow proved he had ever been there. When she returned to clear the table, she found a small piece of paper tucked under the money. On it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for doing the right thing. Some debts take decades to repay." Grace would never forget that moment, not for the rest of her life. Later, as she helped her mother decorate their tiny Christmas tree, she spoke up, her voice filled with wonder. "Mom, you won't believe what happened tonight. A man came into the diner, knew my name, and said I looked like someone who once saved his life." She paused, recalling his exact words. "You are your father's daughter, in every way." Her mother's hands froze in midair, holding a glass ornament. "What did he look like?" she asked quietly. Grace described the long white hair, the weathered face, the eyes full of stories. "How old do you think he was?" "Late 70s, maybe early 80s. Her mother slowly sat down, pale. "Grace, that description matches exactly how your father used to describe his commanding officer when he served in Germany. But your father rarely spoke of that time. He said it was classified." 3 days after Christmas, Grace was working a morning shift when a sharply dressed man in a black suit walked in. He scanned the room professionally, then approached her. "Grace Sullivan?" he asked, his voice calm and formal. "I'm David Mercer. I represent the Special Recognition Division of Veterans Affairs. May I speak with you privately?" In a small back room of the diner, Mercer pulled out a weathered photograph sealed in plastic. It showed a young Army medic dragging a wounded soldier through a forest, both of them covered in mud and blood. The medic wore a distinctive red cap beneath his helmet. "This was taken in 1972 near the East German border," Mercer explained. "The medic dragging his comrade to safety is Private First Class James Sullivan, your father." Grace's fingers trembled as she touched the photo. She had never seen it before, never known this side of her father. Mercer continued, "The man your father saved that night was Colonel Robert Campbell, one of our most valuable intelligence officers during the Cold War. After he recovered, he led numerous critical operations before vanishing mysteriously after retiring in 1989. Official records listed him as missing, presumed dead." Grace's heart pounded. "The man in the diner was Colonel Campbell." Mercer nodded. "We believe so. He has lived in seclusion for decades for reasons we still can't disclose. Facial recognition from your diner's security footage confirmed his identity. This is the first time he's been seen in nearly 30 years. But why me? Why now?" According to Mercer, Colonel Campbell made a vow after your father saved his life that he would protect the Sullivan family however he could. Mercer paused, then added, "We believe he's been watching over your family from afar, waiting for the right moment." Grace remembered the things her mother had told her after her father's passing, about an anonymous benefactor who had paid the hospital bills in his final days, and about the unexpected scholarships that arrived just when she needed them most. "When your father passed," Mercer said gently, "we believe Colonel Campbell decided it was time to appear, one last time, to say thank you in person." The world seemed to shift under Grace's feet. Her simple act of kindness to an old man on Christmas Eve hadn't been random. It was the fulfillment of a promise made decades before she was born. A circle of compassion had finally closed. 3 days later, Grace was escorted through multiple layers of security into a military facility she didn't even know existed. From the outside, the concrete buildings appeared nondescript, intentionally unremarkable, but the strict protocols and how personnel treated Mercer revealed the facility's importance. In a windowless briefing room, a man in uniform with silver eagles on his shoulders greeted her. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Colonel James Whitaker. Thank you for coming." His handshake was firm but brief. "What I'm about to tell you is classified, but under the circumstances, we've received special permission to share it." He activated a screen on the wall, displaying Cold War-era maps of Germany with red markers. "Your father wasn't just a medic, Miss Sullivan. He served in a highly specialized reconnaissance unit operating along the Iron Curtain." The photo of him rescuing Campbell had been taken during a mission to prevent a potential nuclear escalation. The full details were still classified, but the outcome had shaped history. Grace struggled to reconcile this with the gentle man who had taught her to fish and helped with her math homework. He never talked about any of this. He wouldn't, Whitaker confirmed. Those operations required complete silence, even decades later. He pushed a folder toward her. Inside were documents showing regular deposits into a trust fund in her name, anonymous scholarships she had received, even an insurance policy that covered her father's medical expenses. Colonel Campbell had kept his promise, silently protecting her family for decades. Grace's hands shook as she turned the pages. "When he heard your father had passed," Whitaker said, "he wanted to connect with you, personally, to make sure the debt was truly repaid. Why appear as a homeless man? Why not just reveal himself?" "Campbell still has enemies," Whitaker said. "He's a master of surveillance and discretion. His instincts have been honed over a lifetime. Posing as a drifter was his way of testing the situation." An aide entered and whispered to Whitaker, who nodded solemnly. "Miss Sullivan, someone wants to speak with you." The screen lit up. The man from the diner appeared, older, more formal, but unmistakably the same. "Grace," he began, his voice firmer, more commanding, "I apologize for the drama at the restaurant. Old habits die hard." "Colonel Campbell," she whispered, "your father didn't just save my life in '72, he continued. "The intelligence I brought back that night prevented a catastrophic military miscalculation. Millions of lives, Miss Sullivan. That's what your father protected. He was never publicly acknowledged because the mission remains classified. His eyes, those same eyes she remembered, seemed to pierce through the screen. When I saw you offer soup to a stranger without hesitation or judgment on Christmas Eve, I knew. The quiet courage, the instinct for compassion. James Sullivan's legacy lives on in his daughter. Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks. One more thing, Campbell added. The trust fund is now active. It will cover any education program you wish to pursue. Your father mentioned once that you dreamed of becoming a doctor. That door is now open. The military gave her time and space to process everything. When she left the briefing room hours later, she held her father's posthumous service medal, hand-delivered by Campbell's representative, and a letter detailing a scholarship fund established in her name. The media never knew the full story, but within military circles, a secured video began to circulate. A frail Colonel Campbell bowing before a tiny photo of James Sullivan that Grace always carried in her wallet. Timestamp 11:52 p.m. Christmas Eve. A week later, the Veterans Support Foundation contacted Grace with an offer, become an ambassador for their winter relief programs. The role came with a stipend and flexible hours, allowing her to apply to medical school that spring. Soon after, a package arrived, her father's red cap, the same one from the 1972 photo. Inside, a note read, "From one Sullivan to another, the legacy continues." That Christmas Eve, Grace returned to the diner, not as a waitress, but as the sponsor of a new annual tradition, a free Christmas Eve dinner for veterans and anyone spending the holiday alone. Do you ever wonder if making the right choice matters, even when no one's watching? Your story matters too. The following Christmas, Grace stood before an empty table, carefully placing a plate of gingerbread cookies beside a framed photo of her father. Next to it sat the red cap, positioned as if its invisible wearer had just joined the celebration. The diner, once dark on holidays, now glowed with warmth and laughter. Every table was full, from elderly veterans to struggling families, and every year the Sullivan table, as it came to be known, remained unchanged, a place reserved for those alone to find companionship. A young boy, newly placed in foster care after losing his parents, approached shyly. Grace smiled and gestured to the empty chair. "Would you like to sit here?" she asked gently. "My dad always said no one should eat alone on Christmas." The boy nodded, his wide eyes fixated on the photo and the strange red cap. "Was he a soldier?" the boy asked. "He was a healer," Grace replied. "A man who helped others, just like I hope to become."